Rhythmic figures that involve eighth note pickups or eighth note upbeats can sometimes feel a little bit tricky. But if you take the time to analyze them in the same way that you would any other rhythmic figure that has an eighth note involved, you're going to find they're actually not so bad. So I'm looking here at Basic Rhythmic Training number 55 and number 56, which are two examples that use eighth notes in upbeat figures. So let's take a look first at number 55. The very first note we have, or the very first measure that we have, only has this single eighth note. It's this eighth note pickup. So we can figure out where this eighth note should land in the measure. We know that this is a 2/4 measure. So a 2/4 measure has 2 beats, or 2 quarter notes. Or another way of thinking about that is that a 2/4 measure has 4 eighth notes. 1 and, 2 and. So we know that that single eighth note that we see must happen as the last eighth note in the measure. So we're going to imagine there's a 1 and, 2 and. So that eighth note would happen, if this was a full measure, that eighth note would happen on the and of 2. In fact, we can almost imagine, in fact, I'd like to imagine, that we have sort of an invisible quarter note rest here that covers beats 1 and the and of 1, and then we have an invisible eighth note rest here, eighth rest, that will cover the cover the beginning of beat 2. So really, this first measure is just 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Ta, ta. We would say ta right here on the and of 2. The only difference is none of this is written out. It's just implied. So if I were to perform this with my metronome, I probably would give myself a measure or two of counting out 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. But instead of saying that last and, I would begin with my pickup, ta. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. Ta, 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 ta. It's as simple as that. Let's take a look at the bottom example at number 56. So here we have an example that has 2 eighth note pickups. Now again, we know we're in a 2/4 measure, so this is beat 1, this is beat 2. We know that each of these beats is going to have 2 eighth notes, 1 and, 2 and. So that we know that these 2 eighth notes right here must fall on 2 and. And we can, again, almost imagine that there's an imaginary or an implied quarter rest right here. So again, if I were performing this with my metronome, I would start out, I would give myself one measure, 1 and 2 and then I would start the second measure of pickup and I would go 1 and, but rather than saying 2 and, I would say ta, ta to begin the rhythmic figure. 1 and 2 and 1 and ta, 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 ta. So again, whenever you see a pickup measure that looks, or a pickup figure that looks a little bit confusing, just break it down step by step, and chances are you're going to figure out it's not quite as difficult as you might imagine it to be at first.